All right, let's go ahead and get started and try out question 1 from the fall 2016 final exam. So this is going to be a question that deals with externalities, one of the last topics from the semester. So the idea behind these videos is that I'm going to walk through the problem the way that I would think about as a student taking an exam. So hopefully to help you figure out where to spot the key pieces of information, how to kind of sequence your thinking so that you can find the right approach to solve these problems. So let's go ahead and do that. So here we go. So looking at this, music lessons are going to make me a better guitar player. My own personal marginal benefit from these lessons is given by this equation right here. Okay, so it looks like M is going to be standing in for how many music lessons I take. So we see that my family also benefits from more lessons. They get a marginal benefit, right? And so that marginal benefit for my family here is also a function of M. So right away, by knowing that my family has a marginal benefit, that tells me that there's this positive externality in this market, right? So that's something I'm going to have to keep in mind if I'm thinking about the difference between what I'm going to choose the number of lessons and what the socially efficient number is. But likely the question is going to walk me through that. So we've got these two equations for the marginal benefit, so those clearly stand out. I don't really need to keep track of that. It's easy to go back and reference that. But this last little part of the statement, music lessons cost $40 per lesson, well, that's an important piece of information that now I want to keep track of. So basically over here, I'm just going to write that the price of a unit of M is $40, right? That way, when I look back at my margin over here, that price, it's easy to access instead of searching through the text again. So now that we've parsed that initial statement of the problem, let's see what we actually have to do. So here in part A, saying if I only take my own marginal benefits from lessons into account, how many music lessons will I take? Be certain to fully justify my answer. Well, so right off the bat, I'm only taking my own marginal benefits, so I'm going to ignore the family's marginal benefits here. I'm only going to focus on this MBO equation right here. So what am I going to do? Well, I want to get lessons up to the point where the marginal benefit of that last lesson is just equal to the price I have to pay for it, right? So if the marginal benefit were greater than that, I should go ahead and get that lesson. If it's less, then I'm paying too much, it's not worth it to me. So this is going to determine how many lessons I take. So now it's just plug and chug time. So I'm going to take my equation for MBO, that's 100 minus 2M. I'm going to set it equal to my price, which I usefully put over here on the side, so that's going to be 40. So 60 equal to 2M. I'm going to get M is equal to 30 for this first part of the question. All right? So nice and straightforward. So now for part B. What is the socially efficient number of music lessons for me to take? All right, so now I need to take a step back and think about social efficiency here. Who all is involved? Well, I have my own benefits. There's also my family that benefits. There's no negative externalities on the cost side, so I'm not going to think about that at all. So on the cost side, we only have that $40 cost per lesson. So for this part B, which I'll do right to the side here, we want socially efficient to be where any lesson where the overall marginal benefit exceeds price is produced. So I want to go up to the point where MBO plus MBF is just equal to the price of that lesson. And so that's going to be 100 minus 2M plus 100 minus 3M, all of that equal to that same price of 40. So combine my like terms here, that's going to give me 200 minus 5M is equal to 40. Move my 40 over here to the left. It's going to give me 160. All of that equal to 5M. All right. So now if I divide 160 by 5, I could do that with a calculator, could do it in my head. I could leave it as 160 over 5. I'll do it in my head. So I think of that as 100 divided by 5 is going to give me 20. I still have that 60 divided by 5, so that's going to be another 12. So that's actually going to be 32 as my final answer. Okay? So notice that I've got a larger number here in part B than I did in part A. And if we have a positive externality, right, the problem with the market provision here is that I don't take that positive externality into account, so we underprovide. So it makes sense that we got this bigger number in part B for the socially efficient case. If I had gotten a smaller number, then that's a clear sign to me during the exam that my math went off somewhere. Right? So use those little bits of economic intuition as quick checks to make certain you're on the right track and at least there's no obvious inconsistency in your answer, right? All right, so we're done with part B there, which was just asking about that socially efficient quantity. Right? So now we can move on to part C. A local nonprofit wants to help achieve efficient levels of music lessons by subsidizing individuals taking lessons. They plan to offer a subsidy of S dollars per music lesson that's going to be paid directly to the person taking the lesson. What value of S would lead me to taking the socially efficient number of lessons? All right, well, basically, we're back in the world of part A here, where I'm trying to think of how many lessons I want to take. Right? And what we're saying is that my marginal benefit from the lesson, this local nonprofit is going to tack S onto that. Right? So let's go ahead and do part C over here, just because of the nature of my doc-cam here. But what we're saying is I'm thinking about my own benefit from the lesson. I'm also thinking about getting S per lesson in this subsidy. And so if that combined amount is bigger than the price of the lesson, it's worthwhile. If it's less than the price of the lesson, it's not worthwhile. So I'm finding the point where this thing is just equal to P. Well, my marginal benefit's the same as before, so that's 100 minus 2m, right? My subsidy, I don't know what that is. That's what we're trying to solve for, what value of S would be. On the right-hand side, the price of a lesson's still $40, right? And now what we want here is we want me to choose the socially efficient number of lessons. So I can actually replace that m here, whatever S we're solving for, should work out such that it makes me choose 32 for m. So I'm going to put 32 in for that. And that is going to be now what can help me find this subsidy. Right? So that's 100 minus 64. So that's going to be 36 is plus S is equal to 40. So subtract my 36 from both sides, and I'm left with just S is going to be equal to 4. So there's my answer to part C there. Right? Okay, so now we're up to part D. What's the overall change in surplus when this subsidy is put into place? So I could jump straight into equations, jump straight into calculations here. But if I'm trying to think about surplus, almost always that's easiest to spot on a graph first, and then think about what are the relevant areas on the graph, how do I write those out algebraically? So what I'm going to do is go over to my scrap paper right now and think about what this graph should look like. All right, so I'm thinking about music lessons. All right? I'm thinking about prices up here on the vertical axis. And what's going on is we are basically moving with this subsidy from a lower number of music lessons to a higher number. That's the change in surplus we have to think about, right? So first thing I'm going to put on this graph is what are those marginal costs of lessons, right? Well, that was a horizontal line. We said every lesson was $40, right? So if we're thinking about surplus, we have to take that cost into account, right? We're thinking about the net benefit, not just the overall benefit. We have to subtract away those costs. So I need that curve there. So now I have to think about whose benefit I care about. Well, if we go back to the question, we have to look for who we care about. So who we're looking for is the overall change in total surplus. So I don't necessarily care whether it's me getting the surplus or whether it's my family getting the surplus. What matters is the overall benefits to both me and my family. So what I really want to do is sum these two equations together, right? So what I want on this graph is a curve that gives me MBO plus MBF. That's going to be the total marginal benefits. If I compare that to the marginal cost, that should give me the surplus. So if we do that really quickly, right, that should be 100 minus 2m plus 100 minus 3m. Right? So all of that is going to be 200 minus 5m. Okay? So if I think about my graph here, m is my horizontal axis variable. So this equation is already written up in the way that I can graph it directly, right? Because it's the vertical axis variable as a function of the horizontal axis variable. So that means that this number right in front is my vertical intercept. So that's going to be 200 here. And then it's going to have a negative slope of minus 5, right? So it's going to come down as a straight line like this. I could find what this number is here. I don't need to because I don't need to use that number, right? what I need is thinking about my two different quantities from before. So we found that I would have chosen 30 lessons by myself. The socially efficient quantity was the 32 lessons. And it was that subsidy, right, that achieved that higher surplus, okay? All right, so what's going to be this change in total surplus then? As far as me and my family is concerned, we were originally here on our marginal benefit curve. We then moved down to this point here, right? So what we gained in surplus across those units, okay, was this amount right there. So that area is new area below the marginal benefit, above marginal cost, right? So you might wonder, why are we getting this extra benefit here? Well, that's coming from the subsidy, right? The subsidy means that each one of those lessons costs less than the previous one, than they did before the subsidy, right? And now we're also getting additional surplus from those new lessons. So in terms of the new surplus to me and my family, right, it's going to be that shaded area right there. So we're going to split it up into that rectangle, right, and that triangle right there. So in terms of the height here, right, well, I've got to find that height right there. So we know that my marginal benefit was 40 at 30 music lessons, right? Well, the marginal benefit for my family was coming from this equation right there. If I plug 30 into that, that's 100 minus 3 times 30, 100 minus 90, so that's going to be 10. So I'm adding on 10 there, that puts me at 50 right there, all right? So just to be clear, that gap right there, I found that by finding the marginal benefit of my family at 30 music lessons, okay? So by me writing that right there on the exam, I'm telling the person grading the exam, who will also be me, that I knew how to calculate that gap. This wasn't a random wild guess that put 50 up here, okay? So both, that's going to give me full credit if I was right, and if I did the calculation wrong, I'm still going to get partial credit by showing that I knew what I was supposed to be doing, even if I made a little mistake along the way, right? All right, so now we've got everything we need. This rectangle, okay, so we're thinking about change in this case we can think of this as consumer surplus, me and my family. Okay, we've got that rectangular area that has a height of 10 and a width of 30. And we have this triangular area, so 1/2 to get that triangle. The height of it is also 10, the width is 2. All right, so that's going to be 300 plus 5 times 2, which is 10, so 310. All right, so that accounts for me, that accounts for my family. That does not account for the people paying the subsidy, right? That's another place that surplus is changing. Somebody has to pay for that. Somebody loses that surplus. So in particular, right, those subsidies were going to be $10 per, or sorry, we found this earlier. We found it to be $4 per lesson. Okay, so there's our $4 per lesson. And we have to subsidize all 32 of these lessons. So that's going to be 4 times 32. So let's figure this out. 4 times 30 is going to be 120, plus another 4 times 2 is going to be another 8. So that's going to be 128. Once again, you could use a calculator here. You could also just leave it as 4 times 32. Okay? So what's our overall change in total surplus? Well, that change in consumer surplus was positive, right? But we have to subtract what we paid for the subsidies. That's a loss of surplus. So it's going to be 310 minus 128, right? And so overall, that's going to be, let's see, it's going to be 72 to get us to 200. So 172 to get us to 300 plus 10, it's going to be 182. There's our overall change in total surplus. Right? And so that does it for that question. So in this particular question, I didn't have to explain anything, right? So showing my math was sufficient for full credit, but there were a couple spots where it's useful to show a little bit extra, like showing how I got that gap there, or showing exactly how I was calculating total surplus before giving the numbers, so that if I had math mistakes throughout the problem, I can still get close to full credit. right? And this graph was something we never were asked for in the question, but it would have been really hard to come up with these surplus calculations without making this graph first, right? So really think about what information you need to have the problem kind of make sense to you, to be able to figure things out, and write out that information. Don't just keep it in your head, have it sitting down there on the paper so it's easy to refer back to and easy to keep your thoughts straight, right? Okay, well, that was question 1 from final exam, fall 2016.